All right, guys, welcome to the Dead Hedgehogs podcast. Today we have on former UFC fighter Aisling Daly. Aisling, how are you doing?
Hi, guys. Thanks so much for having me.
Excellent.
Brilliant, Aisling. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for coming on, Aisling.
Yeah,
no problem. I'm happy to be here.
So, Aisling, you've since you've retired and stuff, that obviously you were in the UFC there a couple of years ago. We'll obviously go into that in a couple of minutes, but I know that you're also a black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu as well. I suppose how did you get started in martial arts, and how did you get into martial arts originally?
It was all just a bit of a fluke, really. So there was a youth club kind of not too far away from my house, and they had what they used to call the Monday night club. So for 2 hours on a Monday evening, there was an option you could do art, and I couldn't even draw you a matchstick, man. I'm that bad at art. Basketball was the other option, and I'm 5'2" barely. So basketball wasn't really going to be an option for me either. And then they had karate, and it was basically the last thing left. So I went along and I gave it a go, and I really enjoyed it. And my favorite part was it was a traditional martial art. It was Kempo karate. So there was a lot of this kind of self-defense techniques and katas and that kind of thing. But we had these sparring sessions, and we put these little white mitts on, and we spar each other, and that was my favorite part. I was like, okay, there's something here for me. And then I was doing.
How old were you then?
I was 10. Yeah, it's just 10. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
I was super, and that's actually where I got my nickname Ash the Bash from beating up all the boys, bashing them lads, poor lads. So Ash the Bash stuck from there. And then when I was around 16, then my karate instructor Ian Ward, the guy who was kind of head of our association or whatever, he wasn't happy that we were doing bits and pieces of grappling and stuff as well. Because at this point, Ian was training Brazilian Jiu Jitsu with SBG at that time. And he was like, oh no, you can either do that rolling around on the ground like a maggot stuff, or you can do karate. You can't do both. And then Ian went and set up his own club. And then I went with him then when I was about 16, and I just started kind of training with MMA kind of in mind then. On my dial-up internet connection, trying to check out fighters in other countries, trying to see what was going on. But that's how it all kind of started. Just a fluke, really, just a perfect storm.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Do you think as the philosophy has changed completely? There was your karate guy was you have to pick one. You have to pick one. Has that changed now a lot, I think?
Oh, I think definitely among the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners and stuff like that. Maybe a little bit among the traditional guys. They kind of let people cross-train and stuff. But I still think there is a little element of kind of we're traditional martial art, or we're real martial art, as if to say that mixed martial art isn't it's lacking something. I think one of the kind of common criticisms for MMA is that it lacks the kind of respect or that Bushido spirit, or that kind of kind of respect for the other competitor or something like that, which is obviously not true. And if you've competed in MMA, or even been to an MMA gym, or even met people who compete in MMA, you realize that they are decent, respectful people. So that kind of idea that a traditional martial art is better than MMA for that reason is obviously a fallacy.
Yeah. Do you think there's a certain amount of snobbery in certain mindsets in the traditional forms of it?
Yeah, I definitely feel there is almost as if there's more technique to what they're doing, or there's more skill, or I don't know, maybe it's the grading systems and stuff. You have to be able to carry out a certain amount of technique to be able to grade in most traditional martial arts, whereas Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu obviously is performance based. So it doesn't matter if you don't know 100 techniques, but if every time you roll, you do the same 10 techniques really well and are able to catch people, submit people and escape and all those kind of things. You don't need to have a million. And then obviously MMA doesn't have a grading system at all. So I guess that makes it feel it's, kind of not as refined or something, squash, they don't even grade and that. They just go in there and bait the head off each other. You don't even have to be a black belt in anything to fight.
I never actually thought of that. I never actually thought that there's no grading system in MMA.
No.
So, yeah, it's just literally
get in there and bait the head off each other.
I suppose the likes of Lyoto Machida and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson have kind of brought karate into MMA. They kind of
they have, and there's so many fantastic martial arts that come to MMA. Obviously the Caro Prizien and Ronda Rousey and stuff, bringing the judo like background into it, you know, judo being such a well-respected martial art. And obviously you mentioned the number of like karate guys there who've brought that with them as well. And obviously from their coaching background or whatever, maybe their coaches were a lot more open-minded, not thinking that MMA was somehow less than or thuggish or anything like that. Like, and even the likes of modern day fighters, like Wonderboy Thompson or Israel Adesanya or any of those guys, like they're using those karate techniques with their striking, like they're just taking the best parts of every martial art, and that's what mixed martial arts is. It's like the best of everything. Like,
well, in any of the martial arts, you have to be very disciplined. I mean, you have to be seriously. We have a good friend of ours, Aaron McLaughlin. He was very good at karate. Is he a red belt in karate? Like a professor,
multiple
whatever,
multiple black belt, like
multiple black belt, and like the discipline that he puts into what he does is just phenomenal. Obviously, you always had that since an early age.
Yeah, it was. I wouldn't really say that. I definitely was disciplined, but I was disciplined because I loved it and I had a goal in mind. And it's so much easier to be like disciplined, as they say, if you enjoy what you're doing. You know, like the kind of that. If you enjoy what you're doing, you'll never work a day in your life, and that's what it was. Like, it wasn't torturous for me to get up and train. You know, obviously you have bad days, and I can't remember who the quote's from, but like they always say, being a professional is doing the things that you love to do, even on the days you don't feel like doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, so you would obviously have days where you didn't feel like training, or you were tired, or you were beat up. But then what kind of kicks in is your goal that you have in mind. Like, so on days when you're tired, it's like, okay, well, what gets me one step closer to my goal? Sitting here and doing nothing, or getting up and training in some capacity. Like, I need to get that 1% better today. Like, I need to. But it takes that discipline. But
at the age of 10 or at the age of 16 or 12 or 14, what was your goal? What was your goal at that age?
Yeah, I just loved training. Like, at that point, I didn't really know where it was going. I was always competing. So, like, although I was doing karate, there were still like things you could do, like, you know, sparring competitions or, you know, point fighting competitions. You could compete in your katas or whatever, which I never really done all that well. But I liked going in and kind of competing against other people, and that was my favorite part. And then by the time I got to about 16, like, there was people in other, like, other women in other countries who were fighting. There was the likes of Megumi Fuji in Japan, Rosie Sexton in the UK, Nadia van der Velde in Holland. Like, there was women competing, so I knew then straight away, although it might not have been as big as the UFC is, there was going to be people for me to compete against. I was never into being like popular or famous or having anybody know who I was. It was always just a competitive element for me, and everything else kind of came along in the background. So as soon as I saw there was other women competing, I was like, okay, I can do this. I can probably compete against these women, you know. And I always talk about like how naive I was at that age, where, you know, some of the issues that I see now as an older woman, like the restrictions and the glass seals, I didn't see it, and I didn't care. Like, you know, you just that kind of blissful air. Why can't I do this? Yeah, watch me. Like, I can't do this, or women can't compete in MMA, or women aren't going to be any good at it. Like, mind your own business. I'll do what I want. You know, this kind of yeah. And then Tony, now I'm like, oh yeah, I can see why people were like so shocked by that. Whereas at the time, you know, you're young, like, you're young, and you don't really see these things as being an issue.
So when did you get your black belt, Aisling?
And when did I get my black belt? 2016, I think I got my black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. All the years are blurring together now at this stage. You know, that like missing COVID year. It's like, what year is it?
Yeah. I think we're all like,
I know the feeling. Yeah. Were you the first Irish female to get a?
Yeah. I'm the first ever Irish woman to get a black belt.
Oh wow! That must be pretty cool. Yeah,
it was pretty cool. Now, it was just a brilliant feeling, a brilliant experience. Like, you know, it's just such a big thing. Like, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is such a tough martial art by any measure. And then to go ahead and be the first Irish woman, you know.
Pete here loves jiu-jitsu. He loves the whole the
really?
sport around.
Yes, I love it. Yeah, I love it.
A blue belt.
I have blue belt in jiu-jitsu. I got it there about last year, the year before, I think, and I love it. But I started a bit old. I think I started a bit old. I feel aches and pains. You know what I mean? But
there's no such thing as too old. Give me those excuses. I'll start showing you some videos of some older people doing very well.
Of course.
That's the thing about jiu-jitsu. You're always learning, no matter what age you're.
Exactly. There's no such thing as being too old. Like, The only thing that you're going to have to do is work at your own pace and monitor your own self. Like it's especially with
Ashley, can you explain to somebody how that doesn't know anything about jiu-jitsu or martial arts, but can you explain to somebody how difficult it is to actually get the black belt and get to a high level at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? Because people think they just hear black belt, they hear belts, they hear this, they don't realize the difficulty and the grind that goes to getting into it, you know?
Yeah. I know sometimes people say, oh yeah, my 10-year-old nephew has a black belt, and you're like,
yeah.
Fuck you, 10-year-old nephew. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is purely performance based, like, so all the kind of typical things that you imagine, like being able to carry out a set amount of techniques or whatever, you have to be able to do those techniques on a resistant opponent. It's what we would call like a live martial art. Typically, it takes you around 8 to 10 years to get a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And that would be kind of sort of the faster end thing. It took me personally 14 years to get a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Like, I got my blue belt, which Peter got recently. I got my blue belt in 2006. Like, so
wow.
that'll kind of give you like a little bit of an idea of how long it takes you to progress in it. It's a very difficult martial art to progress in because nothing is given for free. Like, everything has to be worked for, so you need to be there on the mats consistently and improving, and it's always compared like for like. So if you come in and you start training jiu-jitsu at 60, well, you'll be compared to other 60-year-olds of a similar weight when you're being great. You know, people sometimes get that in mind, like, oh, I'm not 20, like I'm going to go in and I'm going to be battered by a load of 20-year-olds and I'll never get any good. And it's not how it works. Like, it's like for like. So if you come in and you're a 20-year-old, well, you're going to be compared to the other 20-year-olds, and you'll have to work as hard as each other, and that's how you guys will progress. But it's just performance based, and it can be intense, but nothing is given. Everything is there. That's the only way I can describe it.
I could tell it was intense. I give it a go. Pete tried to get me to give it a go, and I joined the SBG gym in Ballina, and part of me was just before COVID, so I'd done about 6 or 8 weeks, and some days I used to walk away and I used to say, right, now I'm getting it. Now I'm starting to enjoy it. And I'd go back on the next 2 days later on the Thursday. It used to be Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'd go back on Thursday and I would just get, like, I was like, what's going on here? This is a completely different game to what I was doing on Tuesday. So, you know, I part of me was like, I'm actually glad the lockdown has happened so that they couldn't do it anymore, but then the other part of me was like, I do want to give it a go. And I do know the longer you're doing it, the more techniques you pick up, and the longer you spend at it, the more.
That's the same with anything.
That's true. But I think more so in jiu-jitsu, I just thought there's so much learning. Every day is learning. Even if you're a black belt, I'm sure.
That's the beauty of it. It's like incomparable. Like, you know, you're forever learning. Like, and no matter how good you get, there's always going to be somebody better, because it doesn't work straightforward. Like, I might beat you in a match, but then somebody might beat me, or like, and then like it just doesn't work. It's not like maths. Like, you know, it's not like, oh, I beat you, you beat me, and then that goes like that. It's you know, it's
maybe it's like chess, but fighting.
Exactly. That's what I love to describe it, that human chess, because you're trying to outthink the other person and outwit them. Like, you know, it's not about being the biggest and strongest. Now, obviously, that does have its advantages at a certain point, like, but there's a reason why, you know, some of the best in the world aren't all big, muscular guys. You know, I think it was maybe ADCC, which is like the Olympics of submission grappling, a couple of years ago, and one of the guys who placed in the top 3, a guy called Lachlan Giles, he's like about 70 kilos. Like, you know, he's not a big guy at all. Like,
his technique is.
Exactly, the technique is superb. Like, you know, so.
If you go back, like, you said something interesting there where you were saying that, you know, you liked almost the point fighting that you were involved with karate, but you didn't like the katas and stuff like that, which is like, it's almost like I don't know if anyone has never done karate. It's almost like a coordinated dance of all techniques and movements and stuff like that. So, like,
I went to karate once or twice, and that was the boring part.
That was the boring part.
I 100% agree. That's what I felt. I loved sparring. I loved the intensity of the sparring, whether it was like point sparring or continuous or whatever it was. And I like that bit of kind of rough and tumble. Like, there's always been a part of me that liked, you know, getting involved, like, you know, getting mixed up.
There's a bit of a scrap in there, like.
Exactly, a scrap. Exactly, yeah. I did like a bit of a scrap, yeah.
So
that was always my
that obviously, when you got to 16, you're like, you obviously found out about yourself a bit more, I suppose, in going towards grappling and MMA, is it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it was just so much more intense. Like, you know, it was like going from being allowed to be, I don't know, like a competitive walker or something, and then all of a sudden they're letting you sprint, and you're just like, what? Like, I don't have to just like wiggle along here, like.
Was it at that point you realized you could actually make a career out of this?
Yeah, the career kind of didn't come till a little bit later. So I knew I'd compete, and around kind of 18, I had a couple of like amateur fights, and there wasn't much really going on in the women's scene in Ireland at all. There was probably like, I did have 2 amateur matches. And then like when I'd go in to compete in grappling competitions and stuff, there wouldn't really be much of a women's division. But a lot of the grappling tournaments would allow me to compete in the men's category, like of the same weight. So it'd be like men my weight. And I had some good matches and stuff there. And then when I was about 19, then I made my pro debut. And I kind of had a chat with my mom, and I was saying like, oh, you know, I think I want to give this a go. So I was in college at the time. I was in UCD studying English and history. And I said, I'll just take a year out, like after second year, and, you know, see how this goes. And then a year out turned into forever. And I have not gone back since.
Wow.
After a solid first year, I think I had maybe 3 or 4 fights in 2007, and I won them all. And I was like, wait, like, I'm 4-0 now. Like, I can't really give up now or decide that I'm going back to college.
Of course. You have another goal to hit the next time.
Yeah, exactly. And my mom was great about it. Like, you know, she would always say to me, like, sports are something you have to pursue now. Like, you can come back to education when you're older, which obviously I have now, but you know, like, pursue the goal now while you can. Like, there's no point in coming back at 35 with, you know, a master's degree or something, and then trying to be a professional fighter. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, but that's great, because most families don't go that direction at all. When they have a kid that wants to go something like that's unheralded in Ireland, you're talking about women's MMA. It's not even at any scene really in the country. And suddenly your parents or your mother is saying, listen, go give it a go. You're dead right.
I think the big thing was for my mom. Like, my mom apparently, like, when she was a little girl, was a fantastic footballer. And then as soon as she became a teenager, then they didn't have any women's team. So she was allowed to play with the boys' team, like a mixed team or whatever. Then she hit her teenage years. There was no such thing as women's soccer. Like, she wasn't allowed to play on any team. And that was the end of it then for her. Like, and her brothers and stuff, like, my mom's in her 60s now, and her brothers would still talk like, oh, your mom was like a fabulous footballer, and, you know, this kind of thing. Wow. So like,
that's a shame. It's a shame.
But I guess like when you're like 60s, like Ireland in the 60s or whatever, like, you know, there wasn't much going on there in terms of.
You'll often see that as well with if parents are into sports, that they tend to push their kids into sports, no matter what type of sport it is.
They might even do it subconsciously. They mightn't even know they're doing it.
Yeah. Like, the funny thing was, she wasn't actually into sports then after. It was just like, oh, well, you can't play sports now. And that was it. Then she just went into the kind of traditional, you get of a certain age, you get married and you have kids. And then, like, my dad would have been like a GAV man, but he wouldn't have played. Like, you know, he would have been a fanatical Dublin fan, still is, like, but wouldn't have played. Like, and my brothers weren't really sporty or anything, either of my sisters. Like, I was just kind of this, like, I wouldn't say a black sheep because it's not a negative thing, but I was always real tomboyish. Like, I always just wanted to do something where I was sweating. Like, you know, even in school PE or whatever, you know, there'd be like 2 or 3 lads that might play, like, you know, Dublin Minor or something like that, and we'd be doing the beat fitness test, and I'd be trying to like beat those lads. Like,
brilliant.
You know, it wasn't even in my head to beat the girls, because like I wanted to beat the boys. It's better to beat the boys. Like,
of course. Those early days in your MMA career, was that with SPG?
Yeah, it was with SPG. So I was still training with Ian when I first started. So Ian was part of SPG, but had a kind of slightly smaller club. We called it Celtic MMA at the time. He was a massive Celtic fan. And then after a few years, so I just went full time with SPG. Then I was training all the time, mostly because I just couldn't keep up with training in 2 different clubs. Although the 2 clubs had a great relationship, because we were training, like Celtic MMA was training in a small community centre hall. Like, the free times that we had to train were a Friday night and a Sunday morning. you know, so it just meant that I was getting very little rest if I was training, you know, Monday to Friday in SBG, then on Friday evening with Celtic MMA, then Saturday with SBG, then Sunday I was like, okay, well, I need to take a day off. Like,
yeah, of course.
I can't have no rest.
Aisling, as successful as you were in the sport, do you think that if it was now, with more emphasis on the sport and probably more ladies getting into it, that would have even pushed you further into it? Would it have helped? If you get what I mean?
100%. Like the technology's in place now in terms of coaching, nutrition, like fitness, strength and conditioning. Everything is light years ahead. Like, especially when I started, like I often describe to people as it was like the blind leading the blind. Like, you know, people were still, like, people find this hilarious, especially people who don't really know what VHS is. When I say we were watching like VHS instructionals that had been recorded from somebody who went to Brazil or something, you know, this kind of like VHS, what, like mind blown, or like watching UFC on VHS, like back in the day. Like, UFC is everywhere now. It's so easy accessible on TV. Like, they used to show it. I don't know if you guys remember the station Bravo. So it happened in the US, and then they show it a day later on a Sunday evening on Bravo. Like, you know, so this is the kind of way you'd be watching it then. And then in terms of like weight cutting and everything, it was still like, it was so backwards. Like, you know, you were like doing a lot of training and eating a lot less. You know, that was kind of perceived as like, oh, this is the nutrition for sports people, or, you know, strength and conditioning stuff. Especially at the very start, before we kind of got involved with the Irish Strength Institute guys and stuff, it was very much just like smash yourself, like, you know, like just keep going until you can't move anymore, and then you're fit, and that's great. Like, no such thing as like periodization of training, or even all the things that they have now, like heart rate monitors and
even recovery.
Yeah, recovery. Oh, sure. Like, the idea that you would recover as hard as you train, like, no, like, if you were recovering, you were being a wimp, like, you know, what are you missing days for? Like, you know, you obviously don't want it that badly. That would be kind of the attitude, and like that kind of just banging your head off a brick wall. Like, so definitely. And the fact that I was the only woman for years, I didn't have any female training partners. Like, I obviously got great training in with the guys, but I'm sure if I had a little bit more kind of, like, even the camaraderie of having more females around, because as I've gotten older and I've obviously been around the sport a lot, and I have a lot of friends, like some girls who compete in MMA, some girls who compete in jiu-jitsu, and I have really, really great friendships with them. And I imagine if I had those great friendships with somebody who was also driven in the same sport as me around that point, like,
drive you on further.
And the guys were brilliant. They definitely no slight on the guys. I don't mean it like that at all, but just somebody to get it from that perspective, like, you know, I always laugh, like, even now when I'm coaching, like, I hear, you know, one of the guys or something, she's like, everybody was huge there, like, I just got smashed, it was awful. Now, this might be somebody who's 80 kilos rolling with a couple of people who are 90 kilos. And I'm just laughing. I'm like, when I started training, I didn't have any sparring partners. Like, everybody was bigger than me, everybody was strong. I was probably like 58 kilos getting like sparring 70 kilo people. Like, I have no sympathy for you, like, that the person.
But that probably made your technique better. You couldn't use any strength. You couldn't use any strength against somebody that overpowered you so much that you had to use your technique.
Yeah, definitely, you would improve. Yeah, and that I definitely do feel like I did. But I imagine if I had somebody who was my size and who was going technique for technique with me, I probably would have improved very, very much so as well. Like, but no, it definitely did. I had to get smarter rather than trying to just be bigger and stronger, because obviously that wasn't going to happen. Like,
when you mentioned a VHS tape of like early MMA, it reminded me of when the very first episode of the Hardy Bucks, when the Boo turns up with King of the Cage.
King of the Cage, yes. Yeah.
So it feels like a lifetime ago, and obviously the sport has progressed something amazing. But like, you're also amongst a very almost rare group of fighters in SBG in those early days.
Yeah, definitely. We're kind of like the originals, like the front runners, like the likes of myself, Owen Roddy, Connor, Paddy Houlihan, Chris Fields, Carl Pendred. Like, you know, we were doing it before it was cool, like when there was no kind of reward for it. And I think that's one of the big things why we all kind of done so well, because we were just kind of living, like, eat, breathing, sleeping MMA, and we just wanted to be the best in the world. And we didn't really know what that meant at the time or where that was going to go for us. the guys obviously did have the UFC, which was something great to look forward to. But at this stage, for me, like Dana White was still, the women will never fight in the UFC.
Yeah.
Over my dead body.
Yeah.
You know, all this
Did
kind
he
of
have that
rubbish.
attitude?
Oh, big
Oh,
time.
yeah, he was, oh,
We
he
did.
loved
Yeah,
it, shit.
yeah.
He changed his tune though, didn't he? He changed his tune. There was money to
Well,
be made.
Ronda changed that, didn't he?
Ronda changed the tune, yeah.
Yeah, the dollar signs that floated into his eyes, I'm sure.
For these boys have been like, these boys that know the history of UFC. I've only got into it. I drifted into it when obviously Conor McGregor being Irish.
You got on the bandwagon.
Yeah.
Like, Captain Bandwagon.
He'll
be at the front. He'll be at the front of the bandwagon.
I don't get on bandwagons.
I won't hold it against you. I won't hold it.
Anything with an Irish flag on it, I'm all over.
Yeah. I often say that as well. Like, geez, if there was some competition where there was two Irish guys spitting off a bridge, I'd be like,
That's just the way I am. But I even now I pick their brains more than watch it. If Conor was fighting, or if there was an Irish interest in it, I'd be all over it.
Yeah.
Or if there's one lad there that's particularly good, he just has very, very great style to him. He's an African dude.
Israel Adesanya.
Yeah, I just like his style. I've watched him, and I think he's exciting. And but I drift in and drift out, so that's why I'll be asking, like, was that Dana White's attitude?
I don't mind at all. Like,
yeah,
he did have a bad attitude, so there was no UFC for me, and I didn't know if it was ever going to happen, you know. But I just wanted to be the best in the world, like, and it didn't bother me, like, whether people saw or not, like.
What was the female equivalent? What did you get into first?
Like, there was a couple of different organizations that were going on for women at the time. Like, very early on, there was Bodog fights. I don't know if any of you guys remember that. I think it was owned by some American gambling company, and they used to kind of take people off to an island and fight. Now, I never fought for them. It all kind of evaporated, but that was the top organization at the time when I was first getting into it. Then there was the likes of Elite XC. That's the organization that kind of built up Gina Carano, and then they were eventually bought by Strikeforce and absorbed into them. So then Strikeforce became kind of the next big thing.
Didn't Luke Rockhold come from Elite XC?
Yeah, I think he did as well. Yeah, there was a few of them, and then Strikeforce. A lot of them came up from Strikeforce then. So Strikeforce was the big thing. They had a women's division, and then Invicta fights. They were like they were a female only promotion, and that became like the next big thing then to get into before the UFC actually decided that they would allow a women's division, you know. So even Ronda was the Strikeforce women's champion before.
She was, yeah.
When the UFC bought Strikeforce, then
she was automatic champion. Yeah,
exactly.
She was automatic champion.
Yeah, she had walked in as the Strikeforce champion, didn't she?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and they didn't have another champion because they didn't have a women's division. There wasn't another champion in that weight class. I think a lot of the other ones, when you were, say, the Strikeforce champion, but when it was bought by the UFC, there would be a UFC title fight then to kind of unify those titles. Because obviously the caliber of the UFC at the time was still higher than Strikeforce for the men's divisions. Like, and then when that happened, even the way the UFC brought in the weight classes for women, they brought in the 135-pound division, which would have just been too big for me. Like, you know, I fight most of the time either 55 kilos, which would have been 120 pounds, or 125 pounds. So if you're talking about like 10 pounds of a weight class, you're probably talking about 10 kilos of a difference between the walk around weight of the competitors, like, because everybody's cutting off a massive amount of weight. So ideally for me, it would have been the women's 125 division, but the next division that they brought in then was 115.
15, yeah.
But then for me to get fights there, I had to cut to 115 because I was always just that little bit too big for, and my cuts were always horrific at that. Like, you know, I think there was a video that went around a couple of years ago, Cyborg cutting weight.
Yes.
It was actually, she was like, it's actually horrible to watch.
It is horrible to watch.
So
she looks.
Explain it to. I know everyone that talks about fighting and about cut weights or weight cuts. Explain how difficult it is. Obviously, it's not a nice thing to be. What do you have to do?
It's a horrific experience. Like, I would have had cuts in the past very similar to Cyborg's cuts, like to get to 115. So you're basically like extreme diet, and like I remember somebody said to me before, it's like competitive anorexia, and it kind of is. It's trying to see if you can like function the best on the least amount of nutrition to get as lean as you possibly can, and then you get as lean as you possibly can, like through this kind of unhealthy manner, and then you try and dehydrate yourself. So you try and do something like get into a sauna or get into baths that are like so hot that they elevate your body temperature to get you to sweat. And then you're sweating out a substantial amount of your body weight just through water. And then you have 24 hours after you weigh in. Sometimes you'll have 36, depending on the time of the day they have the weigh-ins. And you're trying to hydrate yourself, feed yourself, refuel, and then trying to compete at your best athletic performance the next day. And it's just, it can't happen. Like, you know, so it ends up being sometimes not the person who's the best like athlete or the best fighter or the best technician. It ends up sometimes being people who can manage that stress on their body best. Like, and it's not managed. Like, I know they're trying to bring things in place now that could prevent this from happening, you know, so people are getting
dehydration tests and stuff.
Yeah, or weighing people at the start of camps, or weighing people when they're offered a fight. Because people are backed into this kind of difficult situation where, like, you might be offered a short notice fight and with the UFC, and how can you say no to that? So you could be like over your fight weight, or I don't know, you guys probably know from Team Rhino, Paul Redmond, Redzer.
Sure.
Like Redzer took a short notice fight for the UFC, one weight class below what he would normally fight at, just to fight in the UFC, and put a horrific amount of weight in a very small space. Like, I'm talking like a few days, like he put something like 30 pounds.
Wow.
And then like was a shell of himself in the fight. Like,
how do they expect people to perform then? That's the crazy thing.
Like,
you wouldn't even let a person
that's just making up a number.
You wouldn't even let a person do a maths test to drive a car if they're doing that. Never mind going to fight somebody.
Never mind go into a fight. Like,
so how much weight did you have to cut? How much was your cut? You said it there now, but I'm not good at the maths.
So as percentage, like I probably would have walked around about 64 kilos at the time, and I would have fought at 52 kilos. That would be 12 kilos. I would have between what I started at to what I got down to. Like,
wow.
You know?
Wow. And I remember they used to have the drips. You used to be able to
IV drips.
IV drips.
Used to be, I would have had some of those before they brought in. See, what happened was people were using it for like blood doping. So what they were doing was they were using the IVs. If you knew that you were going to have a test, like a blood test for steroids or something like that, people were, like, say, putting a liter of IV into their system so that whatever was taken in the blood test would be extremely diluted, and it wouldn't.
Okay,
right.
Clever.
You know, so that was like, there was many reasons why they're doing it, but that was one of the primary ones. So then they stopped people from doing that you weren't allowed to use an IV.
Well, did that make it safer, or did it make it more difficult for the cut then? Because people could or was it a bit of both?
I don't, like, from like personal experience of like using an IV a couple of times after making weight, I didn't find it was much better. Like, I don't feel like from the time when I just rehydrated naturally.
Just saline solution.
Saline solution. Is there any
saline, and sometimes they'll add like glucose and a couple of vitamins and stuff like that for after, like, you know.
I heard they put a bit of wee in there as well.
Better, but I think sometimes, sorry?
No, I was making a joke. I heard they put a bit of wee in there as well, just to mess with you.
Legal wee. Yeah, I never found it beneficial, but I think maybe that kind of crutch or that safety net might have made people think, oh, well, I can like put 10 kilos in water because I'm going to be able to get an IV after this. Like,
do you think the people were cutting more weight because of the IVs? That's why they got rid of them.
Yeah, I definitely think that people would have like, oh, sure, I can just get these fluids back into me, like, especially if you took them well, like.
Yeah.
You know, like I remember having such a bad cut in Las Vegas. It was like the one and only time in my career that I missed weight. Like, I missed weight by 2 pounds for the first fight that I had. And it wasn't legal in the UFC to have an IV. So I didn't have an IV after that one. But I was so dehydrated after the fight, I kept getting headaches. And I ended up having to go to the hospital in Las Vegas. And they had to put me on an IV drip. And this was after I'd fought and after I'd won the fight.
Wow.
I was still so dehydrated that I needed to be put on a drip.
And then you're taking punches to the head as well. That's
exactly. Like, and that's the thing that people don't, like, your body needs to make fluids, like, to do all the jobs. So if that's like cerebral, spinal fluid, whatever it is, like, you can't just like put a load of IV fluids into you and like expect you to be grand, because it's not. Your body is going to take time to turn that saline solution into spinal fluid,
into something functional.
Exactly. You just go, oh, I'm brand new now. Like, you know, so a lot of the time you're going in with depleted fluid around your brain to be hitting the head. Fortunately for me with that fight, it just kind of turned into a bit of a jiu-jitsu match. And I think at the end of the first round, I won by submission, but I wouldn't have fancied my chances had it been long and drawn out, because I felt awful. Like I felt terrible. Like my legs felt like lead. Like I kind of felt like I only had one round in me, and then I ended up in a Las Vegas hospital getting like bags and bags.
Did you question it at that stage? Did you question it as like, is this really the way to compete in this way? Like not like in like, because that's the way the sport is, and when you're in the middle of it, I'm sure it's like everyone's fighting at the same.
It's just part of the culture at the time. It's just part of the culture at the time. And
exactly, and there was no way that I was thinking like, oh, is this what I should be doing, or is this not?
Yeah.
Like I knew the weight class wasn't really my weight class, like, but I had no choice. Like it was either, you know, stick where I was and fight in the UFC, move up to 135, like 2 weight classes above, and then be fighting against people who were going to be much, much bigger than me, and I probably wouldn't have much of a chance. Like, you know, I fought Rosie Sexton in 2012 or 2014, something like that. I'm brutal. I remember the names of the years I fought, like, but like she went into the UFC and she didn't cut down to 115. She stayed at 135.
Oh,
and
wow.
she didn't win a fight. She didn't win a fight at 135. Like I think she had 3 fights in the UFC and lost them all. Like, and not because she was less technical. Like she beat me. She wasn't less technical. The girls were just so much bigger and stronger. She was just never really able to do anything with them. Like, you know.
Yeah. What do you think? Technical. What do you think is the solution? Because you're not getting the best fighter then fighting. Is it just more weight classes? Would that be safer?
I think there needs to be more monitored. Like I know what they were doing in, I think it was ONE FC in Japan. They were really rigidly.
They were strict on the rehydration stuff, wasn't they?
Yeah, it was almost like that rule that they have in boxing that you can't weigh any more than a certain amount after the weigh-in. So you're not relying on the rehydration, but they were also checking in constantly throughout your camp. So I think they were checking your weight at the start of the camp, and they were checking your weight, you know, like a week out from the fight, and checking how much you were cutting, and then checking your weight then after the weigh-ins to see how much you were going back up. And what they actually done was moved a lot of fighters up a weight class. They just said, no, you're fighting at this unless you can show us, you know, you can give us proof that you're close to this fight weight that you have been at. Like, we're moving you up. And everybody was just forced to move up a weight class and trying to eliminate weight cuts altogether. You know, it's difficult ones because sometimes they might need to bring in extra weight classes, especially for the guys, because
well, the 170 to 185
it's too big
is massive. Like,
you know, like, so I know people like kind of call them for like a light welterweight division. Like every other weight class is 10 pounds.
So when is the official weigh-in? What stage of a fight is the official weigh-in? Is it a day before?
The day before weigh-in for professional.
And can you put on weight then after that fight or after that weigh-in?
Oh yeah,
you will. You'll put up a massive amount of weight.
So no matter how much you put on then after that, that's okay as long as you're official.
Well, they've got rules about it now, but back when Aisling first started, it was
put on another
cowboys and Indian stuff. You know, it was on reservations as well, so you know they could just pile it on.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
But
it was mad. Like even for me, like I used to weigh in 52 kilos, and then by fight time I'd be 59, 60. Like, you know what I mean? Like I'd be way back up. Like.
Yeah,
which is obviously not healthy either. Like your body should bounce around like that. But
what was it like being on the Ultimate Fighter? That must have been some crack, or was it? Could you enjoy it at the time, or was it crazy?
It was awful. It was miserable. It was no crack.
It was no crack.
Really?
No crack.
It was minus crack. Like it was an awful experience. Yeah, especially because I was at that horrible weight class. So the way they'd work it was you have to be ready to fight on 2 days' notice. So they'll just say to you, you're up, and then you have to be ready. Like, so I was walking around like a waif, like just starving the whole time. And then like the show was not there like to help you make friends or anything. It's just a real messed up kind of system. Like they put 16 people, like, and especially in the women's case, this was the first kind of.
It was an all women's house, wasn't it?
Yeah, all women. So 16 women in the house, and then we were split into 2 different teams. And then one team competes against the other, and gradually people are dwindled down until the last 2, and then the last 2 would compete outside of the house then on the finale, and that ended up being like Rose, Nami Yunus, and Carla Esparza. But it's just like nobody leaves in the house, so like as well. So like you're there, and say somebody loses, like the people who lost have nothing to be working towards now. But they have like a fully like stocked bar in the house, like you can order all the shit food and like alcohol you want.
Yes.
Okay.
Like, there's a pool, all this. So it just starts to kind of like build up, and I found like particularly a lot of the American girls, like they're just like, you know, a lot of times with people when they get into MMA, like they're fighting people to stop fighting with themselves. You know, like it's
Yeah.
It's almost
Yeah.
like a coping mechanism, you know, like people who get into MMA and combat sports and stuff, not all, but like a very high percentage would be damaged in some way or have some kind of background. Like, and there was definitely a lot of that. You could see people just had issues with how they were dealing with themselves, but like really nasty to other people and kind of bullying behavior. And
but I suppose the show was built on creating like
drama. Producers were probably
producers are there. They're trying to stoke it up and stuff like that. But you were in a house with some of the greatest female fighters of all time, the likes of Rose Namajunas or Carla Esparza. They're legends in the UFC now, you know, or you know, especially Rose.
It was a great experience, like, you know, especially to see them like coming up, like, you know, like Rose compared to how she was in the house compared to the fighter that Rose is now has like grown massively. Like, you know, she fought Carla for the title when they first came out of the house and she lost to Carla. You know, Carla was the first ever women's 115-pound champion. Like, you know, and she lost. Eat Carla for breakfast, like, you know.
Wow.
She lost pretty viciously to Joanna Jacek after that, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it just showed like her kind of skill set was a little bit one-dimensional.
It's all wrestling, wasn't it?
Yeah, she has a phenomenal wrestling background. You know, I think she wrestled in college or one of those kind of American setups. But you could just see the difference, like with not having the striking to be able to even use the striking to bring it to the wrestling range. Like, and obviously, like Joanna is phenomenal. You know, like she's the most decorated strawweight ever. You know, but it was interesting to see them evolve, and just kind of interesting to see how they are as people now. Like, Carla was on my team, and then Rose was on the other team. I use the word team loosely, but
Was it Anthony Pettis? Wasn't it Anthony Pettis?
And then it was Gilbert Melendez. The other team captain, like, you know, so that was kind of interesting, even just kind of see those guys and how they would operate and stuff. You know, see what they're coaching, like what their coach is doing, anything different, because I know. Less so obviously at that point because that's like 2014, but I remember definitely, like, you know, 2007, 2008, 2009, sometimes be a bit like, I think what are the Americans doing that we're not doing, like, you know, they're like ahead of us in the MMA game, like how can we catch up with them type thing, like. But then
do you think is that because there was more competing in it as well, more people pushing each other?
Oh yeah, there was so many things. Like, I think the wrestling background was a massive thing because the Americans had so much wrestling experience. Like,
we've no wrestling over here really in schools. Like they do it in school.
We've no wrestling over
It'd be brilliant. It'd be brilliant if there was wrestling in school. The only wrestling we did was in the lawn. Like
whatever you go up to in your own time. Like no, there isn't. Like, and that was a massive advantage for the Americans, especially when the game kind of started. And then it was just more established there first, you know, like the UFC was there first, and like it was a long time before Irish people, you know, got involved in competing in the bigger organizations across the world. So they definitely had a head start. Like, I definitely think defense wrestling was probably the deciding factor, because defense wrestling became different. That was new to everybody. So if you were talking about like freestyle wrestling in the open, that would be a massive advantage to anybody who's been wrestling, like college wrestling, for 20 years. But because a lot of those things are negated in MMA because the cage is there.
Defense, cage.
It's really like, and from what I feel, especially for the whole Irish team, I definitely feel like that was an area that we really worked hard on in the gym. And then when we went into fights, you could kind of see that, like, once we're getting pushed up by the fence or somebody was pushing you up against the fence, whatever, like you had a lot of technique there in that area. Like, we weren't going to be relying on shooting like a lovely Olympic style double out in the middle of the cage, because that's not the technique that we had. Like, you know, push somebody up against the fence, beat them up and take them down. We kind of even the playing field a little bit, like, especially back in the kind of earlier days and going forward then.
There's a part that kind of stands out when I was just looking over some videos and stuff like that from the Ultimate Fighters, when Connor turned up, and you actually looked delighted to see someone that you could have the crack with, even if it probably was a flying visit. I think, was he fighting Dustin or something in Vegas at the time, and he called in to you while you're training or whatever, you know?
Yeah. I don't remember what he was there for, but he was in Vegas anyway, and they did let him drop in, like, not for the good of my health, definitely.
Of course.
He was a big deal anyway in the UFC, and you know, there was going to be people who tune into that episode of The Ultimate Fighter to see him who never cared about The Ultimate Fighter. But I was genuinely delighted to see him, because I was just under so much like physical strain as well as emotional strain being in there. Like I'm a pasty white Irish woman who was in Las Vegas for 7 weeks, you know, and they'd have us like training outside sometimes, and I'd be like literally breaking out in like rashes, like now I'm older, I have some like, I'm basically like nearly a sun allergy I have, like, but I didn't realize I had it, so I'm like breaking out in this like crazy rash, and you know, like, oh, we're gonna run sprints today out in the car park, like at 12, like in the day. This is miserable, like, you know, like
Jesus.
And then we'd have like an evening session, and I was like, I can't, I'm dead now. Like, you made me run out in like 30 degrees or 40 degrees, like Vegas heat, and now I'm dead. Like, I can't go in and do another session tonight. I have sunstroke. Like, leave me alone.
100%,
like,
100%.
I was gonna say Ultimate Fighter must have been one of your highlights, but obviously I'm going to retract that.
Oh God, no, one of my lowlights. Jesus, like, I'd never do it again. Like, and people have different experience. Like my friends, like Chris and Cottle, like they done the season before me. They were on like season 19, and they were in 2 different weight classes, but were on the same team. Like, they run Mark Coleman's team or whatever with BJN or something. But they had a great time. Like, their experience was completely different. But of course, you would have completely like 2 mates in a house having the crack.
Yes, of course,
They were each other's main training partners anyway. Like, you know,
and they could back each other up as well. Do you know what I mean? They have somebody to talk to if something was going right. Yeah. Exactly.
Like, they had to put me into the house and had, say, like Paddy Houlihan or something, you know, like a men's and a women's, you know, 125 and 115 together, and I had a pal in the house. Like, I'm sure it would have been a completely different experience.
Of course.
Plus, if you wanted to vent, if you want to fucking have a right go about someone, at least you have someone there that'll actually listen and have the crack about it, like.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what, Irish sense of humor, you just can't beat it. Like, it's just not the best. Like, the Americans just don't get it at all. Like, stuff just goes over their head. Like, I was lucky enough, there was a couple of us who weren't. There was a Canadian girl I remember, Rand, I ended up fighting her later, Joanne Calderwood, and Alex Chambers. And I can't remember, we were college or like Team International or something like that, because we weren't American.
Yeah.
And we just thought differently. We just were different than the Americans. We're like, these Americans are fucking look at these girls, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas we just kind of thought differently, you know, like, all right, like, we're in the international dream team, like, we're not American, thankfully.
And tell us about your retirement. You were, did I read right? You were kind of forced early into retirement.
Yeah. So basically, the irony of all this, like, I've been heavily involved for years in setting up the safety standards for Irish MMA. So I, along with Professor Dan Healy, were involved in setting up Safe MMA Ireland, which then amalgamated with Safe MMA UK. But this was the idea that you would get blood work done every year, you'd get an MRI done every year, eye tests, all that kind of stuff done before you would fight, because the medicals were non-existent. Like, you know, like, boys would be fighting and they'd have some locum doctor come in and go, any glass eyes or wooden legs. Like, I know I have 2 people that I know, 2 female fighters who've both fought pregnant, you know, like in the early stages of pregnant, but just like nobody testing them, you know, the kind of way. Whereas like all that stuff needed to be revised, and it was like, so I was involved with big push for this, and in my annual medical, then my annual scan, Professor Healy, who I'm very good friends with now, he was like, oh, there's something here I'm not sure about, I'll send you back in for another one. And I was like, all right, like, what's going on here? And then he said, oh, any chance you can come in and see me? And I was like, this is not going to be good. Like, you know, normally these things are just an email. Yeah, everything's grand. You know, I'll see you next year type thing. But he called me in. He said, look, from what I can see on the scan, he said, I've double checked it to make sure. And there's evidence from what I can see that you've had a microhemorrhage at some stage in the past year since your last scan. And I was like, what? Like, what does that mean? Like, because like, I felt fine. Like, obviously I'd fought during that year. I probably had times when I felt a little bit wobbly after sparring or something, but I can't ever pinpoint a time where I was like, oh, I'm definitely experiencing like something more than a normal sparring session. And he just said to me, look, I was 29 at the time, and he said, look, you know, you've been very lucky here. Like, you could have been a lot worse off here. Like, anytime there's a micro bleed or anything like that, there's a good chance that part of your brain will be damaged and you might lose the function of that part of your brain. That it could be something as simple as, like, you know, maybe like Bell's palsy in your face, or maybe like a little bit like losing the power of a limb or something, or it could be something like much worse, as in like being wheelchair bound. Or he said it could just change your personality. You could just find yourself being different, like, and like, as soon as he said all that to me, number one, he said he'd never sign off on my paperwork for me to fight again. That you'll have to find somebody else to do that if you do decide you want to fight again. But to be honest, like I was just one, it was a no-brainer for me to just not do it. Like I was coming to the stage where like I was at the top of my career. I was potentially a fight or two away from winning a UFC title, especially after the performance that I had at UFC Dublin. I'd finally kind of got my weight cut under control, and I just didn't want to be in a situation where like it wasn't worth it, like to be like.
Yeah, I was just about to say, were you devastated? Were you not devastated?
Oh, I was devastated. I was absolutely devastated, like beyond devastated. But at the same time, it didn't really, like, there wasn't like, oh, will I try to fight again or something like that? Like, especially like I know Dan Healy years, like, and like we set up Safe and Made together, so I knew he had my best interest at heart. It wasn't just, you know, sometimes you can get a doctor, like even if you go in with a knee injury, just quit playing football.
Yeah.
You know, like I knew that wasn't where he was coming from. He was like, look, this is what I think you should do. This is the best for you, like as a friend and as a doctor. And yeah, I was devastated. And I'd say there was probably 2 years after that, like where I just kind of like was aimlessly like not sure what to do. I was coaching, I was working as a personal trainer, and I just knew it really wasn't what I wanted to be doing. I was having a chat with a friend of mine, and he was just saying, like, what did you want to be when you were a kid? Like, well, you know, that might be somewhere like to start. I was like, I always wanted to be a teacher. So I started thinking about that, and I was very lucky. My old secondary school, they let me do a stint for about 3 weeks teaching PE to the junior cert, like the first to third years, to do jiu-jitsu with them for PE. And I didn't really like working with the team.
I tell you, if I was in your class, I wouldn't be messing.
Surprisingly, it was the exact opposite. You know, like a bit of bravado. You know, you're not that big, miss. Like, I was like, oh,
then you strangle one of them and they put them up really quiet.
I don't know if insurance would have covered that.
Yeah.
Just like crashing 14-year-olds or whatever.
That's brilliant. The school must have been very liberal to let you in, because I know back. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. They got to teach kids jiu-jitsu in the school.
Yeah, no, and I did enjoy coaching them. I sometimes say it and it sounds like I didn't. I really did enjoy coaching them, but at the same time, it made me think, like, I don't know whether this is like what I want to be doing as in an actual teacher, like a secondary school teacher. And I've coached kids jiu-jitsu for like many years, and I really love coaching the kids. I actually think I want to be a primary school teacher, like.
Yeah.
And then I started getting the wheels in motion then to be able to get that going. Like my level of Irish wouldn't have been good. So when I initially went for the spot in Pats, I didn't get it because my Irish wasn't good enough. So I had to wait until the next year rolled around, and I worked really hard in my Gaeilge. I have a bit of a graph for the Gaeilge now. I'm
Brilliant.
By no means amazing at it, but I do genuinely love it, and I love teaching it, and I love kind of passing on a bit of a love for the language.
Cowboy's actually fluent in Irish.
I wish I was. I love Irish history, and I'm like I love all that stuff. It's something that I just could never get a grasp of was Irish. The Irish language.
It is complicated.
It's very difficult. I found the same. I found it awful difficult.
I would love to. It's actually one of the things that I would love to know how to do, but I just couldn't.
Start off the basics. Get your Duolingo going. Like that's literally right. I done to start. We're starting off with Duolingo, and then when I got to a decent enough level, that I got somebody to start giving me grinds and start to point out like, oh, this is the grammar issue here, and that's like.
Okay.
And there's lots of things online now.
That's where I lost it. I think I lost interest in it right at the beginning, like going back to first class, and I just like in my head I was like, I'm never going to need this.
Every kid was like that, though.
Every kid says that. Yeah. Which is a shame. It's a shame. Really.
I like the grammar. I just didn't even grasp that. So once you don't know the grammar of something, then it's all gone.
Yeah, I think it's just like, you know, once you get somebody who's a good teacher and you have a bit of a passion for it yourself, it's just like jiu-jitsu or anything, even learning to play an instrument. Like there's this kind of like where you feel like you're just not doing anything. Like you're going to pick up the guitar and just be like, what am I doing? Like I'm clueless keyboard, like what? And it's just like that. And it can be like that with Irish, and then something just clicks, and then you just start to, you know, the better you get at it, the more you enjoy it.
I think it's taught very strangely as well. It's
that's definitely changed. It used to be like overemphasis on the grammar, lots of the rhythm.
Oh, it was almost like you're trying to learn multiplication tables. I didn't even say that right. But you know, your multiplications and stuff like that. It was almost taught the exact same way.
Yeah.
Like you had to learn the laws about speaking Irish instead of just doing it and learning it.
Taught by teachers, a lot of teachers that barely know it themselves. Just scraped into it and reading what they're going to do the next day, the night before.
Yeah, there definitely would have been a lot of that, but now with the way the curriculum's changed, there's something called the primary language curriculum, and it's basically taken a lot from the EU research. So it's basically taught the way any other second language is taught in any other country. So if you're in Germany, like learning to speak English, the format is this primary language curriculum. If you're in Sweden learning to speak English, you'll use this format. Like, so there's a lot more emphasis on the spoken rather than.
That's the way it should be. That's the way it should be. Because I often thought, like, somebody's teaching you, like, how we learn Irish, like, for what, 10, 15 years when we're going to school, and we still can't speak it. But if you hired a man to build a wall, and he's still building it after 10 or 15 years, he'd soon get a sack, like. So I'm like, the teachers must be doing something wrong, like.
Even the curriculum wasn't there. Like, so for teachers who did have an interest in teaching the oral language and instilling the love, there was certain elements of the curriculum that weren't by any stretch of the imagination interesting. Like, I know poor Peg gets an awful time, like, but the level of difficulty involved in that book was actually written by her son, and it was written in like quite a beautiful, eloquent, like, prose, but at a very high level of Irish for anybody to be able to actually read themselves. And for somebody, like, for any teenager to be forced into a situation reading this book, and it starts
almost like reading Ulysses.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to get an interest in that. It's not really practical for anybody, whereas all that's been changed around now and trying to emphasize the
I think if to get language, if to get more people into speaking it more, you know, and have the crack.
It's a live language. Like, there's no point in emphasizing to children to read these like dead paragraphs on pages without them living the language every day. And then you can, when somebody has that live language and is using it and speaking it and feels comfortable with that, then you can take it back and start to look at these lovely poems, these lovely songs, and all these lovely cultural things that we have. But if you can't string a sentence together and you're being forced to read like complicated, you know, like old language, like it's not going to be enjoyable, like, you know.
No, and you'll rebel from it.
Yes,
you would rebel into anything. You're not going to appreciate it.
Yeah, rote learning is just that's dead anyway. Like, everything is shown that doesn't work. Like, you know, it's all about giving the children experiences for them to learn from, because if you experience something, you'll never forget it. Whereas if I tell you, you're going to remember this thing because I said so.
You're never gonna remember that. You'll almost deliberately not remember a thing. You know.
Well, forget it to spite you.
So what are you teaching? What are you going to be teaching? What subject?
So I'll have to teach everything. So I'm doing primary school.
Oh, sorry. You're teaching everything.
So you have to cover the whole curriculum.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. That's cool.
Unless you're a shit teacher. Which we're not saying you are, obviously.
So I'll be jack of all trades.
That's
hopefully, eventually master of some.
And will you be able to teach the kids PE during the national school as well? You'll be able to teach them some
I will be able to. It was actually quite funny. I had the kids in my last placement, obviously, like everything with COVID, non-contact and stuff. So I was teaching them how to shadow box, and I was giving them a little bit of the technique for striking and stuff, and they were practicing their kicks and punches out in the yard. So it was nice. They had a great time. Like, you know, I must say the school that I had were brilliant. Like, they were really like just happy to have me there. And even with the MMA background and everything, like, I was in second class, and the principal of the school asked me to go in and have a chat with the sixth class. They had 2 6th class, and just chat to them about my career and what I've done. And so it was brilliant. Like, there was a lot of respect there. Like, brilliant for me. Like, you know, they were saying like, oh, especially at a time when, you know, they're not allowed to have guest speakers in with COVID, to have me already like vetted and COVID free in the school, you know, to be able to go in and have a chat. It was great.
When you look back on your career, especially with the team in SPG, and like it's quite extraordinary of such a small club what it's kind of become in Ireland. How do you look at it? And obviously, do you have any? Do you keep in contact with the likes of Conor or Carl Pendridge or Hulan or any of these guys that would have obviously been in the UFC with you?
Yeah, like pretty much all of the guys that I'd be in contact with, usually fairly regularly. Obviously, a little bit less so with COVID. I'm part of Team KF now with Tom King and Chris Field, so I'm very good friends with Chris. I chat to him very regularly. Cahill would train with us in non-COVID times. He'd be over there a lot. Like, so I haven't seen Cahill much this year, but just because we haven't been training, like I wouldn't really like message Cahill unless there was something to say. But I'd often see him in the gym, the kind of way.
Yeah.
Paddy, I'd often chat to Paddy, like a little bit less so with COVID time, just because I don't feel like I have anything to chat about. Hey, how are you getting on? Yeah, still doing this.
Yeah. We know that conversation.
Yeah. Oh, no, any crack? No. So there's nothing really to say, but I would be in fairly good contact. Connor a little bit less frequently, usually kind of around fight time, or sometimes if he has an old memory or picture to share or something like that, he'll tag me in it, and then we'll kind of kick off from there. But yeah, I'm pretty much friends with all of the guys that I would have trained with, my actual training partners, coaching.
There's obviously been a lot of questions about Connor and his commitment to the sport, especially with losses and obviously in inactivity and stuff like that. Do you feel that yourself, that he may be done? And obviously Dustin's fight is booked now for July, but if it does go badly, do you think that could be his career over?
I think it'll be his career over if he wants it to be his career over. At the end of the day, the UFC is a business and they just want to make money. And even if Conor went on a several fight losing streak, the UFC will still keep booking fights for him because they know that when he fights, they're going to get people interested. I think one of the big things that happened for Conor, as well as being super famous and having everything that he wants at his disposal, I think at a certain point, bar maybe Khabib, everybody who was left in the UFC wasn't really on his level for a while. And I think for a while he was kind of going, oh, well, I'm much better than everybody. I beat Dustin fast. I beat Eddie fast. I beat all these guys fast. Nate's not on the scene anymore. Do I really have to work? I'm so much better than these guys. And I definitely think the Poirier fight would have been a massive wake up call for Conor. And I think you'll see a much improved version, if not a much improved version, a much more disciplined, determined version than in the last Poirier fight. Because even I was guilty of it before the last fight. I completely counted Poirier out. I was like, this is not going to go anywhere.
I thought Conor looked in amazing shape as well. I thought he looked really, really well going into that last fight,
Obviously.
Yeah, he definitely did look in good shape. But maybe they even get your mentality, if you go in there fighting somebody who you've easily beat the last time, do you really have the same mentality in your head that you're getting ready for a war, or you're getting ready for this to be a back and forward, or are you kind of thinking, I'm going to knock this guy out fast now, this will be grand?
It could be inactivity as well. That could be a big factor as well. Ring rust, to say ring rust,
Yeah, I definitely do think it is a factor, it would play in. But
well, the fact that he turned up in that super yacht a day or two before, it doesn't help when he does lose as well. It's which he's always going to do. Conor McGregor's always going to turn up in a super yacht now. That's
that's his mode of transport.
Super yacht. Why wouldn't he?
I was trying to avoid COVID. Didn't want to fly.
Yeah.
That's funny. He arrived in a super yacht.
But his level of success is outrageous.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Oh, it is. What was it? There a year or two ago, was he voted the most famous athlete in the world or something in one of those sports reviews, or top 3 or something?
Yeah,
massive.
But you have to admire that. You have to admire that at the end of the day.
Oh yeah, Jesus, of course. And even just how he's dealt with it, a lot of people with that level of fame that would absolutely crumble under that level of pressure and stuff going into fights, but he hasn't. He always turns up. He always performs. He always gives the fans a show. Even at the weigh-ins and the build-ups and everything. How he's managed all that. How millions of people super interested in every single thing that you do. Millions, hundreds of millions of people.
Beyond the UFC now as well. Way beyond the stretch of the UFC of what it was before.
Oh yeah, Jesus, he's nearly more famous than the UFC. The people who have no idea what the UFC is, but know who Conor McGregor is. He's nearly
elevating the sport,
especially the Mayweather fight and stuff transcended into boxing. Then that became a massive thing. I just don't know how anybody would cope with that level of pressure and success and everything as well as he has. Like, yes, 100% he's made plenty of mistakes. I'm not going to say that he's not, like, you know,
Of course.
Yeah.
able to deal with all that. You know, there's plenty of people who find themselves like thrown into these kind of fame and money and all that, and like they don't last any length of time, whether it's like through like drugs or nervous breakdowns or whatever. Like, it's such an extreme level of scrutiny to be under. Like, everything about him is scrutinized, like whether he does mess up, which he often does, or whether he's not messing up at all. It's like people are waiting for him to do something else.
Of
like,
course.
well, he hasn't done anything.
It's a crazy spotlight you're under. Yeah, it's a bizarre one.
And if you go look, if people are looking for something to pick on, they'll find something.
Yeah. Everything. Like, you said, oh, he looked in great shape. Then he puts up a picture another day. Oh, he looks fat in that picture. You know, oh, he must be training. Oh, did you see him in that picture? He looked like he was out partying. Oh, you know, like,
it's crazy.
It's just like so much. Like, you know,
just
damned if you, damned if you don't.
Where you're talking about partying there, I remember the weekend that he had beaten Marcus Brimage. He fought in Stockholm, flew back, and I think Pete, were you there as well?
I don't think I was there. No, I think you were in Crystals or something.
No, we were in.
What's that club called? Fancy club.
Just across on Grafton Street there.
Lily's.
Lily's. Lily Brudella's.
Yes.
So there was a rap party for Republic of Telly.
Oh, okay.
We were all in Lily's that night, and all of Connor's crew were in there after and having a tear up, and myself and Martin and Collie and I think Kevin McGahern. It was a mad night altogether. It was a really late one as well. It was a good crack. I think that was the only night that we were like. I remember Martin chatting to Connor for ages, and I was just like, it was one of those wild nights that was just like two weird groups that kind of came together. You know, it's good though.
Crazy.
You might have been in the mix yourself.
Like, oh, I can't remember.
Getting back to your own career, Aisling, what was your highlight? What was the
I definitely would say UFC Dublin. Yeah, the last one, like my last fight, just everything kind of came together so perfectly for that. Like, and obviously I didn't know at the time that it was going to be my last fight.
Yeah.
But just to have the experience of fighting for the UFC in my hometown, the first Irish female to fight in the UFC, and then to have that absolutely epic walkout that I had, and then to have a fantastic fight, like that was an absolute war of a fight. Like, and like neither of us took a backward step. Like, we were literally just trying to kill each other, and I just think it was like the perfect way to go out, and it's definitely so memorable to me as just being such a positive experience.
Brilliant.
All around.
The atmosphere that night seemed electric altogether. It seemed outrageous.
Yeah, it was absolutely insane. Like, and I just remember on the night walking out, and like just everybody's going crazy, and I remember just stopping for a second and just saying like just chill here. Like, you know, you're only on your way to work. You haven't got the job done yet. Like, you know, don't be like taking all this in thinking you're deadly because you have this great walkout. And I remember just kind of like blinkers on and getting back to it, because it was so overwhelming. Like, it could have easily been like walking out and seeing everybody and really looking and really absorbing it all and being like, oh, how am I going to do this? Like, so much pressure.
Yeah. And that probably happens to a lot of fighters too. That they get overwhelmed by the occasion or the atmosphere, the tension as well.
Yeah, definitely. No, 100%. And like I said, I felt like I was starting to become overwhelmed, and then just kind of changed what I was focusing on. Like all these people are singing, all these people are looking at you, all these people paying attention to you. You know, that could become like, it's all on me now. Like, what if this goes wrong?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Look, you know, there's nobody else here except you. Just go and do what you have to do. Like, so it's actually kind of very strange watching the whole thing back. Like, I feel like it's watching somebody else. Like, I'm like, who is she? She's mad. Like,
do you miss it? Do you miss the fighting?
Oh yeah, I do. Yeah, I miss the competition of it all. Like, you know, it was very difficult kind of be like at kind of like the top of the mountain, and then to be yanked off and not able to do it anymore. And I don't think it ever goes away. Like, I've had a chat with like Owen Roddy and stuff, and you know, he would have retired before me, and he would have been the same. Like, he had kind of health issues or whatever. So I remember just asking him, like, oh, does it go away? Like, and he's just like, no, it doesn't really. Like, it gets like less, it kind of dissipates, but it doesn't really disappear entirely. Like, and even like say training and stuff like that, like the odd time, obviously not lately, but I used to jump in with the like Chris's amateur MMA guys over in KF, or some of the pros or whatever, smaller pros, and just kind of work with them on like the grappling, the wrestling. So we'd have like the MMA gloves on or whatever, but no, like nobody's allowed to hit me in the head. I'm allowed to give them an out sneaky.
Can you still compete in jiu-jitsu? You can.
Yeah, but there's just something, like, it just lacks a bit of something for me.
Yeah.
I really love jiu-jitsu and I love the art of jiu-jitsu, but to go in and compete in jiu-jitsu, it just seems a bit restricted or something, you know, the kind of rules. And, you know, there's just something a little bit like there's something primal removed from it, you know, because like that striking element. And I guess maybe somewhere in my head I did like the build up, and it's just one fight. And, you know, whereas jiu-jitsu can be a little bit harder to manage for me because it's multiple fights. Sometimes you'll go in, you'll have a match like a black belt adult, it's like a 10-minute long match. You'll have a 10-minute long match, and then you'll have a break for a little bit, and then you'll have another match a little while later, you know, maybe 10 or 15 minutes later. And I sometimes find the ups and downs of that hard to manage, because I guess like built up for one match and then that's over, and then I'm like, where's my little Mr. Chavez is the cat's name.
No way. Hugo.
That's what everybody asked. It's actually the character of Grand Theft Auto.
Oh, no way.
Okay. Very good. Very good.
On the radio show, you know, when you steal the car on the radio show that plays in the background. Yeah. Tonight on Pressing Issues with Maria Chavez. It's just not quite the same for me with jiu-jitsu to MMA. I do like competing and I do keep it going, but
so have you any advice? I always ask this question on people. Have you any advice for anybody coming up, that any girl or lad that wants to get into MMA? Any advice for them, especially now during COVID? It's kind of a funny time to give advice because nobody's.
It is a kind of funny time. Like, one thing I will say, like, if you do want to get into MMA or jiu-jitsu or whatever after kind of things have calmed down with COVID, I definitely suggest that just look online, even see what kind of you know, yoga for BJJ or like strength and conditioning for MMA. Just anything to kind of get you started so that you have some kind of a base for when the gym gets back open. But the priority for me then, once you're getting back to the gym, is finding a gym that you like training in. Like, you know, the atmosphere is the most important thing. If you're training somewhere and you're not happy with training, like, you're not going to stick around in that gym. You're going to be leaving, or if you don't kind of bond with your teammates and your coaches, you're not going to really be going anywhere. And that's male or female, probably a little bit more so as a female. But that definitely is the most important thing, just to make sure that you're happy and comfortable in your environment. Because even if your coach is not the best coach going, he's not the most technical guy or the most technical girl or whatever, but you're happy there, that's going to create a good like relationship for you to go forward. Then if they have your best interest at heart, they'll have no problem with you going and training in a different gym or coming back. And you know, and I think that's the most important thing.
Keep coming back. If you're happy with where you are, you'll keep coming back.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And another thing I will say, like, if there's any women thinking about getting into MMA or are actually training MMA, like, although I'm not sparring, like, I'm happy to have like women over to learn from me and stuff. Like, I have the odd kind of girl like Shauna Bannon who trains in Paddy's and stuff. She'll come over and do a little bit of work with me, like in the kind of grappling, the wrestling and stuff like that. Obviously pre-COVID, which is a while ago now. But I'm very happy to have people come over. I think sometimes people think, oh, she's not competing, and I'm not the actual MMA coach for Team CAF like Chris Fields is. That somehow that they're not going to get any input from me if they come over. But if there's women there in the gym who want to train or want to just float over and learn from me, I'm more than happy to share. Just because I'm not coaching the MMA team doesn't mean I don't. Like, all the MMA I ever knew fell out of my head and I don't use it anymore. Like, you know.
Of course.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah,
that'll make a big difference to someone, no doubt.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, look, guys, thank you very much. Aisling, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. That was absolutely brilliant. Chavez is mad for crack there.
He is. He's looking for food. I think Chavez is looking for food, is he?
Looking for food, yeah. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on. Obviously, guys, please like and subscribe the channel, share it with your mates, and look, we'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Thanks a million.
Thanks so much for having me. I enjoyed that. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Bye, guys.